Hey, welcome back. So I'm going to keep going with the read through of my audiobook, doing some little light editing and getting a feel for what it's going to be like to do the actual raw take. So I'm doing homework. Woo! Because this is kind of a dress rehearsal for recording of some audio in the book. I'm going to be pausing and fixing things that I need to. This is one of the reasons why you should pay for the audiobook when it comes out instead of just listening to me kind of work my way through. Okay, let's do this. Chapter 3, Archive File Number 2846-5882-P, Email Archive. Agents Carrie Reynolds, AID 6467-H, and Forrest Hale, AID 8719-O, report. From Carrie Reynolds, AID 6467-H, K Hunter at redacted. To Bossman, AIC 2928-C, Buck stops here at redacted. Sent Friday, June 20th, 2008, 2:15 p.m. Subject, Adrian Campbell in the principal's office. Attachment, file, potentials list doc, 2.3 megabytes. Campbell profile doc, 756 kilobytes. Hey boss, I'm sorry I haven't written back sooner. Apparently, the local school district has some serious issues regarding student records and propriety. It took us 5 days to forge the documents we needed. Hale has held down a job as a computer network engineer for the last 2 weeks. Hale wasn't comfortable lying to the authorities. I pointed out to him that he might be able to do some good. For preacher-type goody-two-shoes, the rookie can hack. I've got about 12 new candidates. Most of them are grade school age, so they won't be an issue for some years now. Thought you might want to make early contact, though. Some of those poor kids are going to have an extra rough time with the puberty thing, eh? Took a lot of digging to find Campbell's file. He went to school with old-fashioned computers, and not everything got updated when the internet came around. I've attached a summary of the bits and pieces we managed to put back together. It's fragmentary, but when we looked at it as a whole, there isn't any doubt. Campbell is one of the fallen. Local records go back to his birth certificate. Here's our reconstruction. Mother and father are both well-educated, competent professionals. Campbell is the first child of remarriage. Both parents were older but still wanted a child. They had trouble conceiving. They went to a specialist, names in the file. Someone better look into that man. 2 of the other potentials are from his medical practice. Anyway, here's childhood life of young Adrian Campbell. He was born in the late 70s, went to a preparatory school, very posh. Bright kid, too. He was doing pre-calculus in the 5th grade. Not unheard of by any stretch, but still impressive. Physical abilities are all 90th percentile as well, with extreme tendencies. Got records of soccer, swimming, wrestling, gymnastics. In 4th grade, he completed a gymnastics routine on a broken arm, and this is no quitter. As for weapons training, he started fencing at age 7. Overly fancy, but teaches some good fundamentals. That's where our trail picks up. School shrink has an evaluation on file, mandated for fighting. The evaluations are negative. If he's crazy now, he wasn't then. So brilliant little Adrian Campbell comes to school, immediately has trouble fitting in. Take a look at the details of the disciplinary actions. In 5th grade, 3 older boys jumped him in the hallway and beat them all single-handed. And that wasn't the first time. It doesn't automatically make him a shifter, but it fits giants, hunters, and shifter archetypes very neatly. There are a few other clues. In 3rd grade, they did their blood type for a school project. Little Adrian's blood type didn't match his parents'. It was impossible. They wrote it off as some sort of error. Of course, school counselors have a complete grasp of everything that is and isn't possible. Not so little Adrian gets kicked out and goes to public school. The evidence goes very strongly towards shifter here. You know how our fanged friends are supernaturally attractive? Well, the animal magnetism mythos bit Adrian in the ass. He had 24 known associations in junior high alone, and there are 3 police reports of predators taking shots at him. No charges were filed. Kid had it pretty rough coming into his powers. Gang violence figures large in the next few years, so little Adrian learned how to fight. Korean, hard style. More shifter evidence here. Principal heard of a dust-up between Adrian and a gang of 6. Gang lost. There wasn't enough evidence for the police or the school to take official action. There are some glimmers of hope here. Shifters are almost universally dark side types, to borrow the metaphor. Please tell me you've seen Star Wars by now. It's been 30 years. Adrian was caught in the act attempting suicide at 15. I'm going to try and get access to the local children's hospital. I'll forge anything I can get my hands on. What I can tell, Adrian knew that he was different, and he refused to accept it. I don't know what happened when he was 16, but the signs change. He stops showing up shifter red flags. There's no mysterious assaults, no records of the standard depredations, numbers of missing homeless, etc. Everything stays the same. Shifter coming into his power ought to left a trail even a Norm could track. Our little boy went on the run after graduation. He didn't stay in one place for more than 9 months for as long as we can track him. He took classes here and there, even enrolled in a pre-seminary program, but it didn't last. We lost the trail after 2 years. Boss, if Hale hadn't run into this guy in the bookstore, seen what Campbell did to the werewolf, I don't think he would ever shown up on the radar. So here's a kid with no background, no occult connections that we can find. He has no way of learning the rules of the road. That pretty much makes him a walking piece of bait to the supernatural community. Adrian Campbell stays alive, apparently without manifesting enough to register on any nets. We never saw him coming. Agents among the Sundowners, Revenants, and Umbrian League have no record of him. If you can believe Hale, he even hacked a freaking Illuminati database and got nothing. I'll send you whatever we can get from the children's hospital before we move on. Something sure as hell happened there. I'll be honest, boss man, something about this gives me the willies. A shifter who doesn't kill? Never heard of that in all my years. You know me different from the archives. You show me different from the archives, and I'll tell you what Pickett really said at Gettysburg. Still on the hunt, Reynolds. End file number 2846-5882-P. Email archive, agents Carrie Reynolds, AID 6467-H, and Forrest Hale, AID 8719-O. Report. I covered 40 miles in the 4 hours since nightfall. I had less than 2 hours left. I took a moment to rest on the far side of a service road. I couldn't afford to push until kickback again. I might not get my strength back in time. A few minutes of rest, and I'd be good for another hour or so. And this was the perfect time to rest. As soon as I crossed this road, I stopped trespassing on random patches of farmland and moved right into enemy territory. Yeah, that was why I was stopping. I needed to conserve my strength. It had nothing to do with the pair of freaking werewolves on the other side of the road. There are a couple of different kinds of werewolves. I know 2 of the main ones. Skinwalkers are regular humans who invite enough nasty things to live inside them that they can change their shape. Then you have the real deal. I've heard them called shifters, and they're not human any more than I am. When skinwalkers change, they use magic to become something they were never meant to be. The results are very powerful, but the strange of changing kills them before the age of 40 or so. When a shifter changes, and it isn't always into a wolf, they become what they have always been inside. They are bigger, stronger, and they can live for hundreds of years. The 2 werewolves across the road hadn't seen me yet. My hiding place was downwind. Thank you, Jesus. I let my gaze drift over the 2 men. Focusing your attention on a supernatural thing is a bad idea. Even humans can feel someone's eyes on them. I let a casual glance flow across them and felt my brain play catch-up. The guards wore camouflage hunting jackets, standing in the middle of a snow-covered field. Their jackets hung open, ready to throw off for a quick change. I closed my eyes and calmed my mind. I couldn't reach out and try to feel them. I'm not a major league psychic or whatever, but I was part of the supernatural world, and you didn't have to be an eagle to see across the street. If I reached out with the senses I did have, that would be like shouting, "Hey guys, would you mind showing me your fangs?" not one of the more subtle approaches. When I want to commit suicide, I'll wire the pleasure centers of my brain into a wall socket, thank you very much. Getting used as a chew toy of a magically aggrandized demon puppy is not how I want to go. So I made my mind sit as still as I could. I was a pond. There's something great about still water. You don't have to see the whole pond to see if there's something in it. The ripples will tell you what's there. It was a difficult trick, like holding your hand out the car window to judge your speed. Lots of variables made this sort of thing only half reliable. It was a good thing I didn't need detailed information. If these guys were shifters, their pressure would hit me like a pair of headlights set on high. Skinwalker's powers came from the outside beings who took up residence. They wouldn't be as strong as the genuine article. There they were. Each of these guys felt like bonfires in an open field, clusters of bright light that filled the empty space around them. Or, like brilliant guards standing in dark camouflage, surrounded by acres of sheer white. These were skinwalkers. In wolf form, some skinwalkers could be almost as powerful as shifters. In human form, skinwalkers lost a lot of their powers and senses. That made them as sharp as your average dog, as opposed to God's own sensor suite stuffed into a skin suit. If I pushed, I could slip past them and move on. Problem was, if I did that, I'd have a pair of supernatural apex predators behind me and the rest of my enemies in front. Damn. Damn, damn, damn. I hated this. If I'd wanted blood in battle, I wouldn't have spent the last 16 years on the run. I clenched my fist. Sometimes you can't avoid a fight, no matter what you did. If I thought I could spend the rest of my life running, I wouldn't have had Zelthro make me the sword. If I moved past these skinwalkers, I had no way of knowing when or if they would hit me from behind. There was no way I could succeed tonight if I always had to look over my shoulder. I would need all of my focus to push on towards my goal. Damn the company for doing this. Damn fate for putting me in a position to do something. Damn me, because when push came to shove, I was the monster in my nightmares. The two men across the road weren't demons. They were victims of lies and hollow promises. They'd bought power they couldn't keep in exchange for the souls they could never leave behind. In time, maybe, they could turn from darkness and return to the light. Now that wouldn't happen. I, who could never be saved, was going to kill them, who still had a chance, no matter how slim. I was going to do it because none of the other options would work. I gathered an image in my mind and pushed. Thanks to the magic of special effects wizards, we've all seen movie heroes throw swords and knives. The flying blades always hit tip-on and punch deep. In real life, knives and their bigger brothers are nearly worthless as throwing weapons. Without movie magic, there's only a slight chance the blade will hit. At all. Even when you luck out, blades lack the physics and momentum to do serious damage. I held the image of a Scottish war movie firm in my mind. I pushed against reality, sharp and strong. I couldn't maintain this intensity for more than a minute or so, but if this fight lasted longer than 30 seconds, I was dead anyway. How to face two skinwalkers and survive with my skin intact. Step 1. Throw the sword. I pushed so hard that even skinwalkers could feel the pressure. Their heads whipped around. Pushing like this sharpened my senses. Suddenly, night and day were the same. I saw the surprise on their faces. I drew my sword and threw it in an impossibly smooth motion. I didn't need movie magic to change the odds. I had my own. My sword was a Scotch rapier, heavy enough for edge work and tapered for thrusting. The cat's head pommel and full tang let me use a two-handed grip and fight Oriental style if I needed the extra power. Feminist types have mocked me for owning a sword. They've told me that I was barbaric. One ex-girlfriend suggested I was overcompensating for something. Yeah, well, I haven't named my sword either. My blade flashed end over end. It punched tip first into the guard on the left. The force of the impact pushed the guard to the ground and impaled him there. I dropped that image and scrambled to find a new focus. The second guard leaped forward. He didn't bother with disrobing. The sound that he made began as a scream. His body tore itself apart, only to reform around him. An instant later, he was a 7-foot tall, 500-pound werewolf. His scream died inside a snarl that was equal parts vibrato and bloodlust. We stood on either side of the road. Our breaths caught the moonlight. I was scared. I don't mean pre-fight jitters scared. My skin tried to crawl to safety in some other country. My lungs went on strike. I guess they figured I was already dead and wouldn't be needing any more oxygen. My balls tried to reverse puberty on the spot. Step 2. Get past the second guard. Werewolves are apex predators. There is nothing other than another supernatural being that can threaten them. In all honesty, even the things that can tangle with a werewolf find it much easier to go around, by way of Paraguay or something, than force their way through. Apex predators have typically seen it all. Their prey has tried to run. They take it from behind. They've had prey stand and shout, trying to scare them away. They take that prey from the front. They've had prey try to go up and over or out and around them. They drag that prey down to earth and make sure it never flies again. My only chance was to do the one thing that an apex predator just doesn't see very often. I screamed at the top of my lungs and charged. The werewolf tensed, thrown off for a moment by my unexpected action. Then it turned all of my quick-witted plans to nothing. It spread its arms, flexed its claws, and let my own momentum carry me into its deadly embrace. Chapter 4. Step 2. Revised. Get past the second guard, alive. The werewolf cut me off from my sword. His long clawed arms seemed to reach across the whole world. The only way to get to my weapon was past him. I pushed myself forward and ignored the icy sheets of terrors in my tender bits. I pulled another image from my childhood. Childhood images were the strongest. They stood out in the bright colors in my head, rich with the emotional power and the naive certainty that the impossible was commonplace. I could push those images harder and longer than any of the others. I gathered up an image of gymnastics from my recent years, and I pushed. I gathered up an image of gymnastics from my youngest years, and I pushed. Once again, my imaginary image forced itself onto reality. I was strong, very strong. I was fast. I was agile. My body sang a song of flesh and muscle that made gravity and time pale an unimportant chord in the background. No matter how hard I pushed, I could never be stronger, faster, or tougher than a skinwalker. There are a lot of supernatural beings that walked around in this world. Most of them have some sort of specialization. My pushing has a unique strength. It's adaptable. I can be strong and fast like a shifter. I can mess with the odds and shape the world around me like a caster. I can look inside and sense things like an oracle, hunter's instincts, giant resilience, and revenant healing. I can do a decent imitation of them all. That's all it is, an imitation. I can try my hand at everyone's game, but I can never beat them at it. I'd be 7 kinds of idiot to try. I had to use my strength against the skinwalker's weaknesses. This guy was a deadly demoniac with delusions of doghood. I had another clue, though. The skinwalkers hadn't stood guard in their monster form when it would have given them every advantage. Instead, they stood in summer camouflage that stood out against the snow like road flares. They stayed blind and deaf in human form because they didn't want to pass up the opportunity to smoke. I drew 2 lessons from this. First, these guards had seriously underestimated me. No one had told them what I did at Akron. Second, they weren't the brightest bulbs on the Christmas tree. I gathered the strength I'd pushed into my muscles. I leapt out and forward. It wasn't too shabby. I'd cleared the entire double-lane road without much arc at all. I hit the werewolf in the chest like a battering ram, hands out, fingers spread. It wasn't going to do much damage, but I wasn't trying to hurt it. Werewolves can stand and fight on their back legs like a bear. If you think they're clumsy like one of their fatter cousins, I've seen werewolves kick like black belts. All that aside, they fight best and deadliest on all fours. My target was fast, ungodly strong. Get the pun? And nigh invincible. When all of my momentum hit him just above his center of balance, all that didn't matter. We both went over into the snow. With that much force behind the fall, the snow didn't cushion us much. I could feel the hard frozen ground push back. The impact traveled through his chest, up my arms, and nearly wrenched my shoulders out of the socket. I drew two lessons from this. It wouldn't slow the skinwalker down much at all. That was all right. I wasn't trying to. I kicked my legs up to a handstand, twisted at the hip, and carried out a wicked round off. The judges would have given me at least a 7.5 for that one, assuming the skinwalker wouldn't have eaten them. The move was perfect, as fast and clean as any Olympian would have liked. I had all of my supernatural concentration warping reality to carry me through. Even so, the werewolf's claws tore 2-foot-long slits in my tent-sized coat. Then my leg's momentum carried me out into the air and past the monster. I hit the ground 10 feet past the werewolf, facing the nightmare. I had way too much terminal velocity to come up into I had way too much terminal velocity to stick the landing. I bled off the momentum with a backward somersault. I came up into a back stance, still skidding. My feet dug a pair of furrows in the loose-packed snow before I came to rest in the field. I felt my concentration started to tremble. I was seconds away from kickback. I dropped the image and stopped pushing. The werewolf flipped over onto all fours like a quarter-ton kitten. It looked at me and snarled. It didn't sound like the tip of special effects from a horror movie. That was a general noise, made in an impersonal sound room miles away. This werewolf's eyes were staring right at me, and its snarl was as personal as speech. He might have said, "I'm going to come over there and eat your guts, and it will feel like Christmas." But it wouldn't have carried half the menace of that snarl. If I hadn't used a tree a couple of miles back, I would have wet myself right then and there. Step 3. Use the sword. One of the nice things about being able to push reality, when you get it right, it's oh so sweet. I came up to rest less than a foot from the dead guard. I reached down to the unmoving skinwalker and pulled my sword free of his chest. I raised the blade slowly, letting the moonlight fill the blade with the pink brilliance. If I was going to die, I was going to die with a little panache, thank you very much. Besides, maybe the werewolf would see his dead partner and run away. Right. Maybe Father Christmas would drive his sledge up to the field and give me my tea and magic weapons to fight the White Queen. The werewolf's eyes danced over my sword. It snorted. I swear that it sneered. This thing might be stupid, but its eyes could see that my sword wasn't silver. I'd killed his buddy when he was still human. It must have been alive long enough to know that norm weapons couldn't hurt it in wolf form. The werewolf crouched a few inches lower. There was 20 feet of open air between it and my throat. It could clear that in a single leap. "Don't," I said. It would have been more intimidating if my voice hadn't cracked. The werewolf snorted again. Its eyes never left my throat. Its tongue caressed exposed fangs like a wanton. I shook my head. It leaped. I lunged. Blood, fur, and fangs flashed in the moonlight. Crimson crescents of blood splattered against the snow. The world spun around me for the second time that night. White earth and black sky flashed at me. When I hit the ground, I broke. My right collarbone snapped like a dead twig. It echoed off the trees. The collarbone didn't. The sound echoed off the trees. The white snow flew up and embraced me in a second cloud. The snow cloud was candy-striped with my own blood. I didn't need to look to see my wounds. I could feel them. They hurt. Oh, mommy, they hurt. 3 lines of fire ran from my right shoulder to my left hip. My guts weren't spilling out, so that was something. I took a deep breath and whimpered, and I heard a sucking sound from my chest. That was not good. I tried to look down at the damage, but the muscles to move that way had gone the way of the dodo. Neighboring muscles fed me a new definition of agony, as a gentle reminder not to do that again. I lay on my back and hurt. I stared up at the sky. I didn't want to close my eyes. I was afraid that if I did that, I was never going to open them again. I tried to push, but the pain was everywhere. It smothered my thoughts. It hurt, hurt, hurt. I gave another lung sucking whimper. I didn't care that I sounded like a child. I wanted to go home. I wanted my mother. I wanted a glass of water. I wanted the pain to stop. I didn't want to die. In the quiet corner of my mind, where a rational part of me curled up in the shadows to hide from the pain, I knew that I was hurting too bad to push. If I couldn't push, I couldn't heal. Without healing, I was going to die here in the bloody snow. I thought about how much I hated werewolves. Then I didn't think anything. The white hot pain took the burden of thought and burned it. It burned everything. The sucking, whistling sound in my chest was quieter. That was good. It was darn distracting. I closed my eyes. I'd try again in a few minutes. First, I needed to take a quick nap. Just for a second. Flaming werewolves. If it weren't for a skinwalker, I wouldn't be in this mess at all. Archive file number 2846-5887-P. Email archive agent Carrie Reynolds, AID 6467-H, and Forrest Hale, AID 8719-O. Report. From Forrest Hale, AID 8719-O, Third Eye at Redacted. To Bossman, AIC 2928-C, Buck Stops Here at Redacted. Sent Wednesday, July 2nd, 2008, 10:45 p.m. Subject: Adrian Campbell follow-up. Attachment: campbelljournal.pdf, 856 kilobytes. Sir, we were unable to find any leads in the children's hospital. Someone deliberately destroyed any records. Fortune favored us despite the setback. Agent Reynolds tracked down Mr. Campbell's latest residence. He had a cabin not far out past Medina. The cabin was ransacked and burned to the ground, but they didn't get everything. We found a collection of journals and other mementos from his travels buried in an airtight container in the backyard. We're still sorting through the information, but we have our first real lead. Mr. Campbell kept a journal for most of his life. Loath as I am to violate his privacy, the most recent volume began this summer. At the incident with the skinwalker, it's dated 3 weeks before the Akron tragedy. Agent Reynolds requested I refrain from commenting on the passage. I believe he wishes to give you an unbiased first read. I share Agent Reynolds' hope that you can find something worthwhile. It seems Mr. Campbell's prose is somewhat dramatic. Play file. Dear Diary, by the time we're 15 or so, most of us have learned there are no such things as monsters. There's nothing under the bed. Vampires and werewolves and are the playthings of cinema and the sorts of books we're embarrassed to check out at the library. For most people, this is a good thing. It saves us from stress and needless fears. By the time we have little ones of our own to comfort, we even believe what we're saying when we tell them they're big enough to sleep with the light off. I'm not most people, and when the werewolf walked into the bookstore behind me, it reminded me of the fundamental problem with our grown-up world. It's smoke and mirrors game. We become the prisoners of our own conclusions. The real world, with its miraculous structure and magic undertones, fades to a translucent amalgam of grays. We tell ourselves that the things that lurk in the shadows are tricks of the light. Our God-given senses are mistaken. The gang of cultists who rip animals apart are misguided youths, not the victims of supernatural evil. The hulking form you saw walking across the park at night was a weightlifter or a drifter, not a giant on the prowl. I'm not trying to be harsh. It's hard to face the things that go bump in the night. There's a reason that our vision of medieval peasants is that they're superstitious and fearful. They didn't have as many technobabble excuses to shut out the things that make the hair on your neck stand on end. In fairness, if you didn't believe that there were such things as monsters, you would never realize how horribly messy my day had just become. Also, you didn't have to realize that the young man was a werewolf in order to know that you were in a lot of trouble. He wore bright gang colors, sweated profusely, and waved an automatic pistol around. If that wasn't enough, he brought friends. 5 other young men in their teens and mid-20s burst into the bookstore right behind him. They had a mishmash of firearms. They must have learned their gun handling skills from video games. There wasn't a shooter among them. They waved their guns around like rejects from an MTV reality competition. So you think you're a gangbanger? Or something of that sort. The college student behind the desk, a painful stereotype with a second-hand sweater and glasses, made a fair assessment of the situation. He squeaked like a chew toy and passed out cold. A woman browsing through the serial romance aisles saw them next. Her scream was impressive. That woman had a future in opera or B movie horror soundtracks. The bangers joined in the screaming. If you leave out the profanity, which was as predictable as it was unoriginal, it was as MTV as their entrance. Down on the floor! Everyone down! You look up, we'll put a cap in you! I eased down beside the bookshelf I had been fingering through, nice and slow. Quick movements attract people's attention. It's even worse with supernatural predators. I wasn't alone behind the shelf. A man in his mid-30s was on his hands and knees. He had a thick old Bible in his hands. The thing looked like a reproduction from the Dark Ages. Well, this was the antiquities aisle, so that made sense. The man was wiry, but fit underneath the kind of clothes you'd expect on a community college professor. His hair and eyes were dark, his face pale. Oh, shit, he whispered. I nodded. Shit didn't begin to cover it. I put a finger into my mouth to quiet him. I have to give him credit. He shut right up. I'm not an unsympathetic guy, but wolves have great hearing. Werewolves, you get the idea. It's not as good in their human form. Their senses are only as good as a dog's. In wolf form, they're Satan's private sensor arrays. I didn't want them to know we were here. I wasn't planning anything fancy. It's just that my idea of a happy ending involved the bad guys going away without hurting anyone and me going on about my day. Slow and easy, I looked around the shelf to keep an eye on things. Unnoticed is great, but ignorance can kill you. Most of the bangers stood near the doors and tried to look intimidating. I've seen professional killers, and these kids were scary. Not because they were hardened killers, but because they weren't. Soldiers, bodyguards, the men who lived on the sharp end of things as a living had a set of rules of how to live, when to lash out and when not to. You followed the rules and stayed out of their way, and you were all right. These kids weren't wired with that sort of operating system. There was no telling what would set them off, or what their reactions were going to be. At the moment, they scared me more than the werewolf. Speaking of fangs, he and another one stood behind the counter, hacking away at the computers. Computer literate gangbangers! There are your public education dollars at work. I found it, one of the others said to Fangs. It's in the antiquities aisle. Fangs swept his eyes around the labels on the shelves. There was no time to ease back. Our eyes locked. His eyes were brown, so pale that they were almost golden. They widened in shock. I suppose he wasn't used to anyone being able to hide from him. The shock turned to anger. Ah, shit. Just when things looked like they couldn't get any worse, Murphy's Law stepped in and proved that I had no concept of how messed up a situation could get. Buffering. Chapter 5. Playing. A loud, flat sound punched at my eardrums. It sounded like an oak board slammed flat on cement. The first time I heard gunfire, it sounded surreal, nothing like the movies. I never mistook it for anything else again. The gun's report seemed to tear what little order remained in the bookstore to shreds. Men shouted, women screamed, slam, slam, slam. More gunshots filled the bookstore. I couldn't see what happened. I tucked my head back behind the antiquities shelf and hoped that a reproduction of the Book of Kells would stop a bullet. A new sound ripped through the bookstore. It was wet, furious, and hungry. My heart races when I hear gunfire. When I hear a werewolf, fight and flight boils down to an overriding desire to run. The problem was, I was even more afraid of having a monster behind me where I couldn't see it coming. I had to see what was going on, but I wanted just a moment to work up my courage. I took a few deep breaths. The intellectual type next to me was pale. His hands were shaking. Hell, my hands were shaking. He folded his hands together and they stopped shaking as his lips moved in rapid, silent prayer. God and I weren't on speaking terms these days, but I was still glad someone was talking to him. Glass shattered. Fresh gunshots beat at my eardrums, way too fast together for any accurate shooting. I looked around the bookstore. Two of the gangbangers lay on the ground, spreading bloodstains clashing with their colors. They looked younger now, and the sight was horrible. There was another body between two stacks by the door. There was a small gun near his hand. I think it was a Glock, but I wasn't sure. The bright flashing lights of a squad car stabbed at my eyes from the parking lot. There was an unmarked car next to it, empty, and a door open. So the first man was a plainclothes policeman. He must have come in first. The second police officer stood in a shooting stance with most of his car between him and the werewolf. I was impressed. Not many people have the presence of mind to do anything but scream when they're face to face with something like that. The werewolf lay outside the storefront. A standard werewolf is to a wolf what a Kodiak is to a koala. A werewolf stood 5 feet at the shoulders, and that was on all fours. It was as if something found a way to stuff a Bengal tiger in a wolf skin, rolling muscles under black fur. The werewolf crouched and snarled. The police officer fired measured, rapid shots. They each slammed home. None of them did anything. A lot of things that people hear about werewolves are wrong. It's not contagious. You don't get it by getting bit. It never happens by accident. They aren't haunted by the ghosts of the people they kill. They remember everything they do while they're in wolf form. The moon has diddly to do with changing shapes. Silver kills them, that's true. The savage rage, the strength, healing, all of those are true. Long life isn't. The body just doesn't take well to the sorts of stresses that transformation involves. I've never run into a human werewolf, a skinwalker, older than 50. Most never make it to 30. The bullets smacked into the werewolf with meaty noises. The werewolf shuddered from the hits. The officer put every bullet center mass. They weren't going to save him. Even if someone in the store had a silver knife or letter opener, they couldn't get outside faster than the werewolf could attack. It was the policeman who changed my mind. Until that moment, I'd wanted nothing more than to get out of the bookstore unnoticed and in one piece, knowing that there was a brave, dedicated public servant who was about to die, and there wasn't a darn thing I could do about it. That made me mad. I didn't know what brought Fangs and Company to the bookstore, but whatever it was, I didn't want the murderer to get it. It was petty and vengeful, but hey, whatever gets you through the day. I started to move forward, but a hand grabbed my belt. The other man behind the shelves looked at me with wide eyes. "What are you doing?" I resisted the urge to snap at him. "Do you want to get out of this alive?" He nodded. "Then head for the back door. Don't stop running." "What are you going to do?" "If they get what they came for, then those cops died for nothing." "This isn't a movie. Don't be a fool." I pulled myself free of his grip. "I don't have time to explain. Besides, even if I did, he wouldn't have believed me." "What are you going to do?" "Do you happen to have something silver, magic, or holy on you?" He blinked at me. His eyes narrowed in surprise. What I said must have sounded random or crazy. Clearly, he couldn't help. "Then I'm going to improvise." Noise from outside masked my movement as I slipped through the stacks. The gunshots stopped. The werewolf's snarl ripped at the air, and I heard the policeman's voice screaming and the pounding of boots on pavement. The officer was smart as well as brave. He knew when to run. I wish I thought he had a chance. The remaining bangers were standing by their fallen comrades. They weren't looking down. They were staring out of the shattered windows. There were more snarls and screams. The screams were high, what would seem unmanly in a movie. They were the sounds of real suffering and fear. I forced myself to move despite the screams. The sounds were terrible. The meaty, wet sounds that silenced them were worse. From the sound of it, the cop had made it to the far side of the parking lot, and that brought me more time. I hated myself for thinking it. I hated the whole damn mess. I slipped behind the counter from the far end. The geeky cashier was still out cold. Lucky guy. It was easy to crawl quietly behind one of the register computers. Now came the part where I had to risk the gangbangers seeing me and deciding I was insufficiently ventilated. I hate guns. I eased the keyboard off of the counter and onto my crouched knees. I prayed that the cord would reach without pulling something off the desk. It reached. Quick as I could, I called up the last search and duplicated it. The results were fresh in memory, and they popped up in less than a second. As quick as that, I knew what the thugs were there for. "Kaidoi toin therion ton uranon," the computer read. The web engine provided a rough translation. Seasons of the Beasts of the Heavens. It labeled the text as mythology, antiquities, and occult interest. The screen even had a cute little graphic of where the story's two copies rested, right where I'd hidden. I didn't bother setting the keyboard back on the counter. There wouldn't be time. Did I mention that werewolves are big? I could hear it coming back across the pavement at high speed. I didn't think it was going to stop. I was back at the antiquities shelf before it proved me right. The werewolf smashed through the doors like tissue paper and took out the closest shelf, stopping its fall. I kept my head down. I thought I knew what came next, and I didn't want to see that either. From their expressions, the gangbangers had never seen fangs transform. That made sense. A werewolf has pretty decent self-control in human form. They can control the shape as well, but all of that magic pump fury pouring through them, they just don't care. Whether or not the theory was right, I heard the werewolves tear his partners apart with the same verve he'd used on the cops. I had to focus past the sounds again. I found the copies of the tome. How could I miss them? The silver embossed hardcover book was thinner than an old King James Bible, but not much smaller otherwise. It had symbols I didn't have time to recognize on the front, and I grabbed both copies and kept moving through the shelves. I tucked the first copy into my pants under my shirt and held the second one loose. As luck or fate would have it, I made it halfway around the store before the werewolf stopped to savage the bodies. The biggest open space was the coffee bar opposite the entrance. This was the sort of bar where the store where the bottled water cost $5, but you could sit and read for free. Nice gig. I had a moment to see the academic type crouched behind the register there, huddled with his back to me and praying. I didn't have time to try and save him again. If he didn't have the brains to take the back door when he could, that wasn't my problem. I took a quick look around and promised myself that I refused to get murdered in a place this yuppie. I raised the book over my head and shouted, "Hey, fangs!" I saw the werewolf look up. Its snout was blood-soaked. I swear its eyes were glowing. I waved the book at him. "Looking for this, fur face?" I swear it sounded a lot tougher in my head. Then my heart tried to crawl up my throat from sheer fear as a quarter-ton of werewolf tore its way, literally, through the stacks straight towards me. The monster covered the last 20 feet in a massive leap. I let out a manly squawk and dropped the book. I managed to grab the thing's wrist before it hit me, but that didn't cancel out its momentum. It struck me like a ton of bricks, or a ton of just about anything, and I went down on my back with that thing on top of me. We skidded across the floor, scattering the coffee tables and wicker chairs. The counter's glass shattered, but it stopped our fall. The werewolf was terrifying 50 feet away. 5 inches away, it surpassed my powers of description. Blood, fur, fangs, claws, incredible strength. None of the parts added up. You could smell its hatred. The jaws snapped forward, and I jerked to one side. It got a snout full of glass shards instead of my throat. It jerked back, snorting. I felt something cold and wet splash all over my left side. My first thought was that we'd set off a sprinkler. Then the werewolf stopped trying to eat my throat. It fell back off me, thrashing and screaming in pain. Smoke rose from the line of splash marks along its side. Behind me, the academic type muttered a few words under his breath and unscrewed the cap of some bottled water. He reached into his man purse and handed me another one. "You wanted holy water," he said as he emptied the bottle onto the shrieking monster. For the first time, I noticed a gleam of white plastic at his throat. Of course, the man searching for an antique Bible would be a preacher of some sort. The werewolf snorted and rolled off me, snarling in pain and shaking itself to get the offending liquid off. I knew better than to wound what I couldn't kill. Intelligent predators are as vengeful as they come, and you can't keep your guard up for decades. I grabbed the thick book the werewolf had come for, and the heavy book's silver embossing was thin against my fingers, but when I slammed the book's spine against the werewolf, it flashed when it struck. The werewolf rolled over and clawed at me. I blocked with the book, and it whined as its hands smoked at the contact. I gave the werewolf the book it came for, silver spine first, again and again. It was big, fast, and angry, but angry doesn't always help. If the gangbanger had been something other than a werewolf, he could have fled and tracked me down later, when it had the advantage again. It was a werewolf, though, all fur, fang, and direct action. It was so used to being the biggest, baddest thing in the world that it didn't think about being outmatched. I wasn't as big as the werewolf or as strong, but I was trained and older than I looked. The thing reared on its hind legs and clawed at me with great curving cuts. I held the silver embossed book in both hands and parried with short, brutal motions. Light flashed again and again as the metal of purity hit with the unclean monster, and I pushed forward. It bit at me, and I hit it in the chin with the book. Flash! It cut at my gut, and I brought the book down and into the way. Flash! The werewolf stopped fighting back before I did. I only stopped when it started to morph and change. An instant later, there was only the body of a teenage banger lying on the ground. I staggered a bit, and I felt like I'd just run a marathon, but I was still alive, and the book's silver had protected it from damage. Like I said, supernatural. The holy man looked at the dead werewolf. He looked at me. "Who are you?" "Preacher," I said as I walked steadily away. "You don't want to know." The book cost $20.95. I left a 50 on the counter on my way out. There are things that go bump in the night, things we should fear. There are other things less famous out there, things the monsters are afraid of. My name is Adrian Campbell. I'm not the same as you are. If you know what I am, then you know I can't shut out the horrors of the night. If you don't, then you're better off not knowing. Archive file number 2846-5887-P. Email archive. Agents Carrie Reynolds, AID 6467-H, and Forrest Hale, AID 8719-O. Report. From Carrie Reynolds, AID 6467-H, K Hunter at redacted. To Bossman, AIC 2928-C. Buck stops here at redacted. Sent Wednesday, July 2nd, 2008, 10:45 p.m. Subject, Adrian Campbell follow-up. "Hey, boss man. Hale showed me his report. He's busy scanning and cataloging. Looks like we have 16 years of stuff to go through. Young Mr. Campbell's mysterious background shouldn't be a mystery for much longer, providing the kid knows who he is himself. Thought you'd get a kick out of that diary entry. Also turns out that Campbell's a slick one. One of the journals was a fake. He put a new cover on the second copy of the Greek manuscript. He even took notes in the margins. We're going to take another look at the Akron massacre before we leave town. Campbell's notes will help us catch up before the time runs out. I hope. Reynolds. P.S. Hale's a little put out by Campbell's description of him. I think they're a riot. I sort of like this kid. Hope we don't have to kill him." Well, that's the end of chapter 5, and that's all the time I got to read today. Look forward to catching up through the rest of it. All right, you have a good night.